Gentlemen, the time has come once again to discuss things.
Brightest day and blackest night, no evil shall escape my sight. Let those who worship evil's might beware my power, Green Lantern's land. Ring capacity 46.1, ring capacity 58.9, ring capacity 64.5, and now I'm charged and burning bright. Ring capacity 75.
Okay, hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Geeky Gentlemen. I am Sid Part 2. Joining me today is Steve Baxey and Alexander Stevenson. Hello.
Hey.
What's up?
Not a lot. This is a unique episode of Geeky Gentlemen. It just feels wrong right off the bat because we're recording in the morning. So everyone, please forgive us if we do some yawning or something, because I'm pretty sure we're all more or less night owls. Anyway, but we're doing this for you. We're doing this to make sure you get your episode this weekend, because we had a really hard time setting this up. But anyway, before we announce the topic, even though it's in the description of the video, the title...
We're going to keep you in suspense despite knowing exactly what you clicked on.
Exactly. Before we announce the topic, I just want to let you know that you can now download episodes of Geeky Gentlemen and listen on the go. The link is in the description for the download. New episodes are posted with the episodes on YouTube, and if you would like to listen to an older episode of Geeky Gentlemen, just leave a comment on that episode, and I will download it for you, and I will upload it to the website for you so you can download it. But you may ask yourself, well, I don't know where to find all the old episodes of Geeky Gentlemen. I just don't want to scroll through all of your videos, Ian. Well, check it out. There's a Geeky Gentlemen playlist, and you can find every single episode of Geeky Gentlemen that we've ever done. Okay. Anyway, Steve, what are we talking about this week?
Today we are talking about the 12-issue maxi series written by Tom King, based on Marv Wolfman and Joe Staten's old creations, the Omega Men.
I was unsure if this was like pre-existing characters or because it just felt so new that it didn't feel like anything, right?
Well,
It's like DC's Guardians of the Galaxy, basically.
yeah,
Like,
it's basically DC's Guardians of the Galaxy. The big difference being I think the Omega Men were probably more obscure than Guardians.
I was going to say Omega Men are even more obscure somehow.
They are. Omega Men's got, I think, two big volumes. They've got the original stuff, and then they've got a secondary volume which lasted only, I think that only lasted like 5 or 6 issues, I don't remember off the top of my head. And then Tom King came in and did this mini, which was supposed to be an ongoing, but by issue like 6 it got canceled, but then it got reinstated, and then he only got 12 issues, and then it became a maxi somehow.
I had no idea about that. I just thought it was another one of these books that they took a risk on, and it only made it 12 issues. Certainly you can tell that they come to kind of a complete story, but you could have read that as just the end of this arc.
Tom King likes to do this thing where everything he writes comes in seasons. So the Vision is a 12-issue story. His first 12 issues of Batman are one story. This is 12 issues, one story. The first 12 issues of Sheriff of Babylon are one story. It's kind of like that.
That makes sense to do with comics if you're going to do, like, you know, archy stuff that the first 12 issues all work as a piece. So you have a year of work.
Right.
And that you know everything is going to get collected now, pretty much, so...
Yeah.
Well, you hope.
There are a few things that aren't, strangely. This apparently has sold quite well in trade, from what I read.
What's hilarious about it is its single issues didn't sell at all because no one knew what the fuck it was.
Yep. The same week that the first Rebirth Batman issue came out and was top selling was the same week that Omega Men number 12 came out and was the worst selling DC book.
That's hilarious. And this was part of the whole... Yeah. This was part of the whole DCU initiative, which is weird because, like, that was just a year ago, but it feels longer, and we've already rebooted. This is part of the whole...
stupid.
Yeah. this is part of the whole DCU initiative, which was the idea of story over continuity, and it really helped knowing that, being a Green Lantern fan, because, wow, this makes no sense in the continuity.
Okay, I was going to ask about that, because I'm not anywhere near as knowledgeable about Green Lantern as the two of you are, and, I mean, I didn't feel lost. I know who Kyle Rayner is. I knew that he had been a White Lantern, and that's about all you really need to know going into the story, but I wasn't sure if there were more connections in there that I was just missing or what.
Well, there's, like, just weird stuff that doesn't really make sense if you know the continuity. Like, you know Larfleeze, the Orange Lantern, right?
Mm-hmm.
Part of the reason that he was never, like, the reason built into his origin of why he was never a problem for the Green Lanterns before was the Guardians just gave him the Vega solar system to be his solar system, and there would never be any Green Lantern or Guardian intervention in it.
Oh, okay.
And that was to keep him quiet.
Appeasement.
And so, yeah, well, he's not now because the Green Lanterns came in. So that's why the Green Lanterns were, like, banned from the Vega system. But if you use this, then those two cannot possibly coexist together. But once again, it's fucking DCU, so who cares? But it's really distracting to read that. It's like, oh, the Vega. And, like, he kind of even works that in with Alpha and Omega at points. So it's like, oh, this is better, but I still really like Larfleeze, so I don't know how to feel.
Well, if this is a story over continuity, I guess it works in that respect.
Yeah, certainly. It's interesting in its place in Green Lantern history, I guess. And I have very, very mixed feelings on this book. It's certainly good. I'm not going to deny that. But as someone who really, really loved the White Lantern Kyle Rayner story arc in Green Lantern New Guardians, it's really hard for me to read this because it kind of stomps all over a lot of the things that happen in that. So I'm kind of at this place where, yes, this is good, but I don't like it.
That's fair. Would you consider this to have worked better if it would have been almost like a Dark Knight Returns style thing that's just maybe a little bit in the future, maybe Kyle Rayner's in it, but it's set enough after the current events that are going on in comics that you could buy maybe this is some sort of alternate future?
That could have helped. Like I said, it's really hard to read. It's one of those things, like, you mentioned Dark Knight Returns, and I think that's the perfect parallel, because you got to remember Frank Miller got angry letters from old Batman writers for ruining their character.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how I feel. It's like, damn it, Tom King. I admit this is good, but I really liked Kyle Rayner, and now he's like this emotionally scarred former hostage with, like, a, physical scar to represent that, and he's like a terrorist now, and I'm not okay with that.
I mean, to be fair to him, he assumed he was going to get more stories with Kyle Rayner to sort this out, and he didn't get to pick the status quo. It was just given to him.
Mm-hmm. That's true. I get that. I'm just saying, like, that's just where I'm at reading this.
Sure. Yeah.
And so, like, I really am in sympathy with the old Batman writers there. So that's kind of where I'm coming from it at, but I'm going to try my best to be objective because I think there's a lot here good to talk about. So, Steve, you're the one raving on about this book, so where should we go from here?
I guess the first thing I'd love to know is, Alex, whether or not you liked it.
Oh, sure. Throw it to me. I liked it. I didn't love it. I think there's some positive things that it says. I think there may be some negative things that it says, and we can get into the nitty-gritty of how that works out ideologically, I think. Particularly given Tom King is someone who used to work for the CIA. Specifically,
so if there's anyone who knew about overthrowing governments.
Yeah, there's all sorts of... This is such an obvious parallel to the kind of quagmire that the American Empire has gotten itself into in the Middle East and North Africa. And it's not the least bit subtle about that. And I think that's almost one of the things I admire the most about it, is it just is so in your face. And that's maybe where I start to have issues, too, because I don't necessarily agree with the ultimate thing that it says at the end of it, but we'll maybe get there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Steven, like, you loved it for its parallels and everything, correct?
Yeah.
So this should be an interesting discussion. I'm just trying to think where to direct. You know what? No, Steve, you take over this episode. You're gonna decide the path of the conversation.
So, continuity aside, this is probably my favorite Kyle Rayner story. I think for him as a character, this is really interesting because it's kind of the ultimate recontextualizing of a superhero in a 21st century context of, like, we had this weird hiccup in the early 2000s of 9/11 happens, well, what the hell do we do with superheroes now? I think this idea of shifting Kyle Rayner into that and acknowledging how good of a person he is, but also how very easily ideologies can war at each other and you really don't know where you stand on just because you're vaguely defined as good is really interesting. That whole fact that he's barely in the book for the first half of it, I think, was a good move because it helps us sympathize more with what the hell's going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really liked the section where he's he's doing the oath, and then he starts with the Catholic prayer, and then he kind of like breaks into the oath, and then he just doesn't know what to say anymore.
Yeah.
That was really good too. Yeah.
The scene where he's in front of the mirror and he takes his own blood and he puts it over the Omega symbol to make the Green Lantern symbol again. That could have been really morbid, but I think the way that it played was actually almost inspiring in a way.
I agree. Mm-hmm. I thought that was fantastic. And there's lots of really deliberate pacing to make stuff like that work because this uses that 9-panel grid and plays with that structure a lot.
Yeah, most people I would suspect would be familiar with it from Watchmen, and that's one of the things stylistically that it's famous for. And you're able to tell so much on a single page. There are pages of this where all of the panels are just a fight scene, and you can almost see every individual move within it. And do we want to just go to the end of this? Because the story almost ends talking about the panel grid itself, and Kyle views it almost as bars which can kind of keep you in and keep you separated from what you're seeing, and it's, I think, supposed to be trying to make some kind of commentary on how we see all of these things in the news, but that's not necessarily the reality of the situation. It's far more human and it's far messier than, frankly, the propaganda that we get fed actually makes it out to be.
Yeah, I love that because I think it's a lot of it's on ideology comes from framework, whether it's the news media or it's the people in charge or power structures or whatever. So the fact that he's literally referencing the way the panel structure works, and the panel structure is the thing that both empowers him and depowers him. Like there's a thing in issue 9 where you start with 9 panels and every page you lose 1 panel until you get to the middle where there's a 2-page spread. And then every page after that, you gain 1 panel back, and it ends with a 9-panel grid of Kyle getting his ring back. If you with that kind of parallel with what he's talking about at the end, and the basic idea that everything that's going to happen in the future post this storyline or like post these events is still going to be boxed into some vague perception, and some people are going to use that as motives for good, like Kyle did early. Or they're going to use it for motives of not caring, but it all amounts to the idea that our perceptions are being played with, and the way that we're seeing these events, how brutal they are versus how tame they are, all come from these really vaguely defined constructs of news media.
Yeah, I also thought it was interesting that they end with that idea that the panels keep you separated from the story. And it made me go back through every issue, and something that's become popular in comics nowadays is to have characters reaching over the panels. And I went through and looked at every page, and like no one ever breaks the panel. I thought that was an interesting like meta touch.
There's a lot of that because the Omega symbol is symmetrical, so if you cut it down the middle, it mirrors both sides. And every issue, for the most part, there's a couple of hiccups that Tom King mentions, but every issue, the first half of the panel structure mirrors the second half of it, and the first 6 issues mirror the structure of the last 6 issues. The big exception being issue 3 doesn't completely work, because it's got that weird middle chunk where everyone's talking about their stories. But other than that, that's pretty much it.
Interesting. I like when people play around with their medium like that. That's just, do something that can only be done in that medium, for the medium, because comic books are often trying to be something else, so.
Yeah.
And I feel like paneling has gotten so stale. Like, we see the occasional book that has really outstanding paneling, or that you can tell that they really put thought into it. But most books is just sort of generic, and you'll have cases of people reaching across panel gutters, and it doesn't have the same effect that it used to, because it's used all the time, and it's not used, I think, effectively anymore.
Or intentionally, right? Like, a lot of times people reach across the panels just because that's the way the artist drew it and they ran a page or something. Like, they're not putting thought into it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's disappointing as always, but, it's... Paneling's such a background thing. It's kind of like lettering in comics. You don't think about it until someone makes you think about it.
Yeah, it either has to be really good or really bad
to notice. Yeah, that's just like, it's the unsung art of comic books. It's like the person that in a movie that I don't know, not cuts the film, but like just arranges things in different ways. Just the person that does like the sound design, you don't notice it until someone does a really good job or a really shitty job.
I mean, you can even say that about some CGI stuff lately. Like with Daredevil, sure. You wouldn't notice the CGI unless it was good or bad.
Yeah. I don't know. I really like the meta commentary, and then how it feeds into the metaphor of the news structure and the way we see things is really interesting too. I wish I'd had time to read this twice, and I really have no excuse except I just didn't get the time to read it twice.
I will say it helps because when it opens with that video that they're sending where they're explaining how Alpha and Omega as the religions and as first causes and end causes work, there's lots of interesting character bits that are all dropped in just from those like first 5 or 6 pages that don't make any sense unless you know where it's all going.
Okay.
Like it's very intentional in its movements. If you know who each character is, you'll understand why they're there doing what they're doing.
Interesting.
Well, that's such a gutsy opening to I think it was just the preview for this, where it almost is, it's mirroring terrorist videos. And I even saw a headline when this first came out, and I was able to find it too. It was on Kotaku, and it's superheroes who act like ISIS are the stars of great new DC comic. So,
that's exactly what I mean, right? Framing.
It is one of those things like, what word do we use for them? Do we use terrorist or freedom fighter? It's all just breaks down into the way in which you're experiencing, like what side of the issue you're on that you want to use the term for. And it's odd that there are very few like neutral terms. I think the closest you can think of is insurgent, but even that has a fairly rough connotation to one side. But it's really hard not to take a side with things like this, and so to make these the stars of a comic book is, really frickin' gutsy move.
And I think for the most part, I don't think any of these characters were used in previous versions of the Omega Men. I think they're all new.
These are all new people.
Yeah, I was curious about that because, like I said, it seems like such a new thing that, I mean, it already doesn't matter continuity-wise, but like it seems like such a new take on them that I was unsure if it was ever a thing before, or if it was just, there are only so many words that sound cool that we can use for titles of comic books.
Yeah, and I mean, partly I just mean like, someone be like, you ruined Primus, he was my favorite character, and now he's a terrorist. Well, that's not going to happen because I don't think he existed before this.
Gotcha.
Either way, I mean, they clearly established, like, with his character, he used to be different.
Yeah.
He was a non-violent passive resistor, and he came up against the fact that, oh, that doesn't actually work. So he's become this person who's willing to use violence.
I feel like Primus is ultimately one of the most sympathetic characters in the book. Him and Brute, probably.
Yeah, I would say probably those two were the two that I related to the most in this.
Yeah.
Yeah. What, you didn't really feel like shed a tear for the princess that decapitates natives? She didn't tug on your heart. Like, that was the weird part, is like, she was the only one that was kind of right, and you don't know if she's really the kind of person that you want leading, or if she's just doing it all for herself in the end anyway.
Well, I mean, I almost viewed it with her, like, no matter what, if you look at, like, different intervention policy, if you've got a superpower like the U.S., and they want to intervene somewhere, they can always find some group that's pretending to need assistance, quote unquote, and they just go in and they funnel someone bad to get the rest of what they want. So the Omega Men, for the most part, have an interesting view on the problems of their system, but the princess is that, like, chunk in the middle of, like, you need me to make this work, so it doesn't really matter whether or not I agree with your ideology, because ultimately I'm going to be in charge.
Yeah, and that's the thing, that Primus has that great scene where he's, like, drunk with Kyle, and they've both, I call that term brothers in arms, because you've both seen the same bush or shore. They've both slept with her, they've both been manipulated by her, and they've both been radically changed in their ideologies, forced to change in their ideologies by her. And so that was just really interesting to see how they're reflecting on that. And he's like, a year ago I believed in peace was the only option, and I found violence to be abhorrible. I thought we had to be better than the people that we were fighting. But yesterday, I killed a guy. It wasn't a robot, it was a soldier. Stabbed him. Just like, fuck, dude, this is really heavy shit.
I mean, and that's partly why I like it. Like, I feel like there are a bunch of right answers in this story, and there are a bunch of wrong answers, and I think that's the point.
Yeah, it's not easy for you. Like, in any other, like, most of the time, and I read Green Lantern, I can attest to this, most of the time it's Hal Jordan shows up, there's some kind of evil dictator that's undeniably evil, and then there's the good resistance, and Hal helps the good resistance and then leaves the planet, and all is well, and he usually bones the princess along the way just because he wants to be like Captain Kirk. And that's the end. This
isn't a new formula.
Yeah, this is like very much like, that's how Green Lantern works, and to take it and go, no, everybody's fucking shit, and it's just trying to find the ones who are the least shit. That's really what we've got here, is everyone's kind of fucked, and it's up to you to determine, like, where you stand on this. Like, what's better, like, peace under oppression, or chaos under freedom, or what? And there's no right answer here, and that it just challenges your perceptions.
And that's maybe where I start to deviate from liking this a little bit, because I think, I mean, as far as the conflict that this is trying to comment on, I happen to think there are some right answers and wrong answers. And as far as how I think this tries to show every side of the issue, I think it's reflective of the kind of just attitudes that do exist in the United States about wars going on in the Middle East and things that the United States is involved in, which they shouldn't be, which are, because of how they're framed, confusing to people. Like, it seems like it's this mess, but if you start to sort out the details, it's like, oh no, like, Assad's not great, but you can't just go to somebody else's country and depose them. It doesn't,
Yep.
There's international laws and stuff.
Yep.
Yeah. And I mean,
that's,
I feel like the book is a
fairness, that is part of I think the wider anti-imperialist struggle is, like, I'm not a fan of Putin, but I also recognize the important role that Russia plays against American imperialism in the world. I don't like the government of Iran particularly, but I also see how what an important role that they play as far as resisting American imperialism. So I can sort of see what they're trying to say, but strangely from the other side in this. So it played to me in that respect, and I guess that's why I maybe have issues with it, why there's things I like and things I don't like.
And I mean, to be fair, I think that's partly why, for me, it works, because I agree, there are some right answers in this conflict, right? Like, you can't just fence it constantly on issues and say, well, both sides are wrong. You have to pick something somewhere along the line.
Yeah, and Kyle tries that third alternative, and it just doesn't work.
Yeah, and I think part of that just comes from the fact that, like, right answers are much harder to get to or much harder to frame than several wrong answers. And so the way this book is presenting things is that, like, it's presenting the mess of everything in juxtaposed with a very neat and ordered structure with the way the book's presented. But it doesn't mean that there aren't more stories to tell in the middle of this, because it jumps around time several times towards the end, which was my biggest problem with it. But then, and then, like, you don't necessarily know all these characters outside of a specific context that they're being engaged in. I think that this book isn't saying that every answer is wrong. I think it's saying that the way that this conflict's being presented to us is not showing us that there might be a better way, and that's ultimately the scariest part about it, is that you want to just be nihilistic at the end and say, like, well, nothing matters, everyone's gonna screw it up, but probably not. We still have people like Kyle Rayner that want to do something good at the end.
Yeah, and it's interesting because Kyle has that whole thing where he tries for the third alternative, and it's just, no, there's no alternatives here. This is the dichotomy that has been created by the situation for essentially going back, centuries, decades at least in this scenario. I thought it was interesting how Krypton's destruction was worked in as a plot element.
I loved that.
Yeah, that was really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I like the idea that, that's a problem that people have to consider. And it's interesting because that kind of gets thrown every so often against Green Lantern. It's like, where the hell was the Green Lantern for Krypton?
Yeah.
Why didn't he help out? I think it's in one of the Grant Morrison's Justice League books, but you see, like, Tomar to land on Krypton and give the ring to Jor-El. Like, crash land on Krypton and give the ring to Jor-El. And it's like an alternate reality or dream or something weird like that. But, side note. No, I thought it was interesting to work Krypton in as the metaphor for oil.
Yeah.
That was fantastic. Or as the start for the metaphor for oil. Like, what if we have, just this, like, everyone needs this thing. This is the only area where we can get this thing. What are our solutions? And so you have the Citadel, who kind of plays the role. It's messy because there isn't, like, a one-to-one for any of these things. Everyone's kind of playing multiple parts. But you have the Citadel, who is simultaneously playing the role of just the Middle East dictator, particularly Saddam Hussein, who's, done terrible things to his own people. It's well documented. There's no disputing it. But at the same time, what happens if you take him out of power? Oh, the whole region fucking explodes. Great. It's a nightmare scenario, and it's just interesting to see how it's all playing off of each other.
And I mean, interesting, like you said, there's no one-to-one, so like if you substitute different real-world parallels, the landscape of things change. Like if you want to view the Citadel as the U.S., and you want to look at this as more like imperialistic, or you want to look at it purely as the oil issue, or maybe if you want to throw Superman and the Green Lantern Corps in and look at this strictly as like non-interventionist policy. Like there's lots of things going on, and everything is both ultra-specific and ultra-vague.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's just good storytelling. Because if it, like, if you just had the Citadel leader, what's his name? I keep forgetting his name. The purple man that kind of looks like Thanos in a couple too many panels.
What is his name?
Yeah.
I just remembered him as the purple guy.
Yeah, the purple guy that kind of looks like Thanos. The Citadel leader, like, if he'd come in and had,
It's Bishop something, right? Archbishop?
Yeah, something like that. Like, if you'd come in with, like, the green beret and really bushy mustache and,
The Viceroy, that's what he was called.
Viceroy.
Oh,
yeah, it's something like that. It's a 2-word title.
Yeah. Like, if he'd just come in looking like purple Saddam Hussein, then it would have not worked as well. It would have been too like you can do that. You can be too on the nose. I've heard people complain about the Captain America books in that way. They're like, I know you think it's good, but it's just too on the nose for me, and I just can't get over the fact that it's that on the nose. I'm like, well, apparently people aren't getting the message, so I think it needs to be on the nose. But regardless, I wouldn't have played that well. This benefits from time and the idea of mixing things just a little bit to make you realize that, even though there seems like there are only two sides to this issue, guess what? Depending on your perspective, you can kind of mix the two and you realize that everyone's just as bad as everyone else. No one has the moral high ground.
Yeah, and I mean, not to say that it doesn't exist, just that the way the world has been structured, it's very difficult to find.
Mm-hmm.
The world building here is truly impressive. I mean, to build an entire star system and to have it this complex, to have two religions in it competing, all these different systems and all these different factions. You have kind of an interesting Israel parallel with the princess and her people, how they basically just got taken from one place and put on to a different planet, but people already lived there. And so they're essentially a functioning settler colonial state against these blue native people that she kills like 5 of every morning just to practice her sword fighting. And I think shows that same sort of attitude that's there that the Israelis have towards the Palestinians.
Yeah. Part of Tom King and the artist, I think his name is Barnaby something. Bagenda? Something like that. It's a BB. But him and Tom King actually worked out an entire star chart and know where everything is and where the people come from and a good 50, 60 years of history for them before they put them here.
Oh,
That's
why
great.
wasn't that a thing that was included?
Yeah, that was...
What that damn star chart then?
The trade has segments of it. It opens with a good 2 or 3 sentences about every location that you're going to see, and a little bit of a half a map, and then in the back it's got all the character designs and some of the city designs that you didn't necessarily see in the book, but that's about it.
Ah, man, I really want that map. I want the damn map.
I know.
Alex, you've gotten me addicted to fictional mapping, god damn it.
I know, it's like my new obsession. I can't let go of it. I'm trying to build a gigantic Star Trek map that's based on everything that we've seen. Because it drives me nuts. I'll be watching an episode and they mention some planet, and I'm like, well, where the fuck is that? I can't find it on the map. So...
Well, here's the thing, Alex. It's not real.
Well, the Vega system, for instance, is actually real. It's one of the closest systems to Earth. There's a Class A giant white star that's there, as well as a white dwarf that orbits it. And it's actually quite close to Earth.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong. Don't we see 2 suns in one of the panels? When they're on the planet that got genocided?
I think we might.
Yeah.
I like turning words into verbs.
It works. English is adaptable.
Yeah, exactly. I'm pretty sure you see 2
There
suns.
are no nouns, only slowly moving verbs.
Well, it's fun because one of the things I always point out about Green Lantern, and I think just talking about the fact that they put this much thought into everything. One of the things I love about Green Lantern is it is both Star Wars and Star Trek. It can be just as fun and epic and black and white as Star Wars, where it's just this cool action thing, but it can also take its time and be more slow and methodical and deep and questioning of the way in which we view the world, the way in which we exist, and challenge us in that way that Star Trek can be. And importantly, it does so without having to create a perfect world, so that you don't have the problem that I think is, and I don't want to get too into it, but the problem that I think is in DS9 of, in order to have characters do the right thing, they have to break from this perfect society that's been built. You have the Guardians, who are just another society that kind of has maybe the right idea, you could argue, and occasionally they still mess up because they have their own interests, their own biases, and are interested in hiding their own past. So you can have the individual members of the Green Lantern Corps, which are this huge, diverse background, break from the traditional way of viewing things that the Guardians have set up. They're not, importantly, an army of mindless robots,
Yeah, because that would go perfectly.
Well, it did go perfectly. An entire sector got wiped out. An entire sector got genocided. There, I used the word twice. It's now official. So, like, it's really interesting to see how that's used here. Like, Green Lantern, it can be just, I will fully admit, fun, dumb action that's just really pretty to look at times. But it can also be really, really introspective, and that's what I love about the universe, I guess I'd call it. The mythos, there's a better term for it. And so it's great to see Tom King doing that. Again, it's such a weird thing I'm left with here, because what I love about this story is that it's so vague and it leaves you with so many questions, and you even question Kyle Rayner with his whole idea of like, well, wanting to do the right thing isn't enough. You need to find a way to do it no matter what. And like, I have other nerdy problems with it, like, ending a war with the White Lantern ring would not be a goddamn problem. No matter how advanced they are, it would not be a goddamn problem. But it is, and that's just how the story needs it to work. They play fast and loose with the power level of the Green Lantern ring quite often. But just the doing that to Kyle Rayner, leaving him like that, as a fan of Kyle Rayner, it does leave me with this just like, God, it's a really shitty way to leave that character. And I know that he wanted to do more, but I still feel really, really like I get this pit in my stomach. And I think he knew he was doing that. He knew he was changing the character. That's why when Kyle gets his ring back, he's not the White Lantern anymore. He's the Omega Lantern. He is black.
That costume, by the way, looks awesome.
Yeah, it looks like a really cool Tron-y costume design. But there is something being said with that.
Yeah.
Like, this has affected Kyle on a fundamental level. I will say, and this is my only, like, continuity thing that I think, like, legitimately should have been addressed in the story, because he goes so far as to point out what the ring can and can't do. And that is, there's an issue of the Green Lantern New Guardians book where Kyle is in a war zone with two factions that are just so entrenched in their own side of the conflict that they can't possibly stop for a second to see the other side. And so he uses the indigo light of compassion and just kind of like sends it out in a wave. And then both people on both sides of the conflict stop fighting. They're like, oh my God, what are we doing? Because they suddenly feel compassion for the other side. That could have been a useful thing to address in this story.
Yeah. I didn't know he could do that.
Like, that's the problem, is no one has seen the other side as complex. Like, regardless of where we stand on it, regardless of its real-world parallels, no one in this story is envisioning the other as maybe having some kind of merit whatsoever. They're just like, this is the most evil side. No, this is the most evil side. No one is trying to make the effort. And so that would have been a very useful thing for Kyle to do, and knowing that's in his power set, and Tom King addressing the fact that the ring has to use, the white ring particularly, has to use all the emotions of the spectrum. I think it's kind of a problem with the story to one regard or another that he never tries to use compassion. This is a weird sentence. He never tries to weaponize compassion.
The white ring is really powerful, so I guess it's just a matter of, like, there's a lot of things he could have done with it. I wonder why there wasn't a more built-in device for why he's a little bit weaker here. Like, he's got that moment where he needs time to rest in order for him to keep going, but maybe there should have been, like, a more clear moment of, like, maybe he's just not able to charge as much while he's on the Vega system, or the mineral that they're all looking for interferes with the ring's ability to work, or something.
Something like that, because, I mean, it's important that part of like, the whole way in which the story is generated, because you can ignore continuity, but it's hard to ignore what's set up in the story. Part of the reason that the whole story is, like, predicated on is Kyle had to give up his ring in order to do this. He had to take it off. and so for him to like have to take it off, you need the society needs to be worried about its destructive capability when used against them. So that kind of throws out the idea that their weapons are just so powerful that the ring is completely ineffective. Especially when you compound that with the idea that, you know, a bunch of ragtag group of rebels that are, you know, jungle fighting cats at points are enough to cause a big-ass problem for this military system. So, like, the ring being one of the most advanced weapons in the DC universe, it creates problems with that perception, too. So it's just like, it's this weird thing where you kind of have to just let it be because they play fast and loose with the capabilities of the rings anyway. So it's just one of those things you kind of have to accept. I don't think there's any kind of rationalization. I think it's just, it's a sacrifice for the story.
Yeah.
And we see that plenty with other superheroes too. Like Batman gets tied up, and it's like, but he's an escape artist. He would be there for about 10 seconds, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's one of those things. Just like it's a sacrifice for the point of the story. I would have liked something to address it more directly, particularly the compassion thing. Like I can get past him not being able to take down armies single-handedly, but the compassion thing in particular really stood out to me. Because, and once again, it's not just that he's used it before in other stuff, it's the fact that King mentions, in order to use the ring, he has to use all the different emotions.
And I mean, it should be noted that Tom King loves Green Lantern, but he loves Hal Jordan.
Yeah.
So, I mean, maybe part of it is also just like he used Kyle because the metaphor with the White Lantern and because that's what they gave him. But I imagine, because he's talked about this in interviews, what he really wants to do is he wants to write like a Star Trek TOS style Hal Jordan book.
Oh my god, yes!
That could be cool.
He thinks Captain Kirk is the best fictional character in history, because he thinks there's so much you can do with that, but he's very rarely, if ever, written that type of character.
That'd be interesting. Alex, I wanted to talk with you about this, because I was mentioning the Star Trek thing earlier. Correct me if I'm wrong, there's an episode of, I think it's TOS, or might be TNG, where they go to a planet that was kind of operating on the status quo that this system has. Like, there were the two warring planets, and, like, they just agreed to execute... Like,
A Taste of Armageddon.
Yeah, like...
That's one of my favorite TOS episodes.
Yeah, where it was just this... to try to explain it, there were two warring planets that had been at war for, like, centuries. And they would just launch, like, digital attacks on... or, like, simulated attacks is a better way to put it, on each other. And, like, whoever died, in quote-unquote, in that simulated attack, as opposed to destroying the buildings and destroying, like, the infrastructure and the society, whoever died in those simulated attacks would have to be executed by the state itself. And it was like this idea of like trying to make war pretty, to eliminate the destructive nature of war, and so the society was just able to exist in it. So like in a simulated attack, a building would be destroyed. Well, everyone in that building now has to report to the state for execution in order to keep this status quo the same. Otherwise, they would have to go to actual war, which would mean, cultural destruction. And Kirk took a really interesting stance, especially for Star Trek. It was Kirk, right?
Yeah, it was Kirk.
Okay. Took a really interesting stance, particularly in the idea of Star Trek, which is, okay, we're going to destroy your little simulated machines in your execution chambers, so now you actually have to either go to the negotiation table or go to actual full-out war. Have fun with that decision.
Yeah. And I think there's actually been Star Trek novels that have come in and tried to play it like, that maybe wasn't the best decision, because they didn't make the right choice, but it's interesting because Star Trek, the original series, was only on for 3 seasons, and it only got a 3rd season because the fans protested. But that was one of those episodes that I think the network looked at and was like, we can't be putting out deliberately anti-war stuff, in the 60s. This show's a little too pinko for us. And it's sort of interesting to see the direction Star Trek went and how utopian the Federation actually got. But yeah, we have sort of a similar situation here where there's multiple sides caught in this intractable conflict, and we have a hero who comes in. And I think, unlike Kirk, there's not really a simple solution here that they can just wreck stuff and everyone will be forced to get along. Because as we see at the end of this, they're not under the yoke of the Citadel's oppression, but things aren't perfect either.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, you see that because there's that scene where everyone's going to get properly executed, and there's a range of reactions of people that are like welcoming it as a religious experience, people that are afraid of it, people that have no emotional investment in dying. Like, even if you got the perfect government at the end of the story, the people here aren't even prepared to deal with that on any sort of emotional level.
Yeah.
Right.
It's just been so bad for so long.
And there is an alliance formed of all the different species towards the end of this to change the power structure of the system, but it's not really like a people's war.
Yeah.
This is just sort of one particular group that happens to have taken control of the situation that didn't necessarily have popular support.
Yeah. And I think that's partly why Kyle is so interesting in this mix, because I feel like Kyle's the only person talking about it from the perspective of the people, as opposed to any sort of, like, allegiance to a view or a religion.
Certainly. And it's interesting to see that last scene with Kyle in the... it's weird. I don't know how much of an interplanetary player Earth is in this situation, but I guess it is now.
Yeah.
Like, to see him with the American military guys, like, so we need to know whose side are you on? And he's like, the whole point of the book is there's no side that's the right side to be on. Everyone's interests completely compromise the situation in different ways.
My favorite part of that ending, by the way, sorry to interrupt, I just want to mention my favorite part about that is if you look at Kyle's shirt, it says varieties of religious experience.
Yeah.
I love it. No, it's interesting to see, because, like, I kind of feel like that was Tom King after he was, like, leaving, like, in his exit interview or whatever for the CIA. He's like, so where do you stand now? Like, just, like, guys, you were there with me. You know where I stand. We're all completely fucked. Like, I think that's what Tom King's, like, middle finger to it all is. It's just like, oh, this is so fucking ridiculous. There's no one has any goddamn perspective anymore. It's just all this fucking whirlwind of everybody's fucked and we have no idea what to do. No one has the right answers anymore.
What new way are we going to be justifying intervention in these countries, and what one are we going to take down next?
Right? It's like, oh, well, we're going to have to go into one of them. Here's an idea. Find other solutions to the Krypton problem. And I like that no one even does that. It's like, no, this is the only solution. You say that. I think Jarrell had some ideas.
Yeah. Listen to that guy.
Yeah. So I don't know. I like that. I do like, however, that's not brought up. That it's acknowledging that, like, everyone's so entrenched that there's no time for it. No one wants to find the third solution. Everyone wants to be in this dichotomy because that's just the situation they put themselves in.
When you get towards the end, particularly with issues like 10 and 11, it gets to this point of, like, the ideologies are kind of gone, and now it's just a matter of who gets to say they won.
Yep. And it's interesting. I do like putting Green Lantern in that or a Green Lantern, White Lantern, whatever, in that situation, because usually Green Lantern diplomacy is just break into the White House or whatever of the ruling sides on both sides, and then, like, fly them halfway across the world or planet or galaxy or whatever, and make them sit down together. And just put them in a green bubble and make them work it out right there. I love that's Green Lantern diplomacy a lot of the times, but it's interesting to see a much more nuanced, complex view of how to get it done.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I don't see this as like an anti-superhero book in that sense, in that superheroes are easily able to take the third way because they're superheroes. They can do the impossible. And this isn't a situation where the impossible is really possible. you have to deal with the material conditions that exist in this system. You can't just come in and easily solve it like that. It's not that simple. And so in that respect, I almost find it interesting that Tom King would want to write a Hal Jordan as Jim Kirk book where he flies around and does just that. I would hope, especially given how well I think this was handled in a lot of ways, that it would have more nuance than we typically see with Kirk.
Mm-hmm. Probably, but I think part of it's also that, Tom King also said that he's also annoyed with being the, hey, you were in the CIA, do this political secret agent thing, which is partly why some of his stuff's different. He's doing Sheriff of Babylon right now, which he says is his Garth Ennis, Brian Azzarello-style 60-issue career thing, and that takes place entirely in the Middle East and has several stories going on, and it's relationships between the people there and the U.S. military and that. And so that's extremely explicitly going to be stuff like this. So I imagine a lot of his larger superhero career is just play with the superheroes while you can, while simultaneously writing about the shit they can't solve. Because it'd be a very depressing situation if you had to pick one or the other.
Well, I think that's just how the industry works, is you work on the mainstream superhero books in order to, I guess, make a name for yourself, and that allows you the freedom, and you would have built up enough of an audience at that point that you can then go do your own create own things.
Mm-hmm. And that's fine. I wish people, I like, the Gaimans and the Morrisons who like to come back to the big characters every so often just because they have a love for them, as opposed to the Alan Moores who just oh fuck, none one relates to these characters, I'm adding more. No one relates to these characters who sell thousands of books every year or whatever, and people love them to death and
they'd be able
feel
to
inspired
to them more if Alan Moore didn't portray them as despicable human beings.
Just maybe.
It's possible.
I love Alan Moore for that. It's I don't like the Killing Joke. At the end of the day, I just don't feel like Batman and the Joker are very relatable characters. Well, I disagree. But whatever, Alan Moore. So yeah, I wish we had more people like that. And I hope Tom King is one of those people that'll come back to the big name characters. Not do them just constantly, never let anyone else get a chance, but just come back every so often when they have something to say with them, because I do think that he has really interesting takes, even if I don't like, at the end of the day, where he puts those takes. Generally speaking, I don't think there's much of a point in getting too annoyed with where comic books, mainline continuity comic books, take the characters, because end of the day, it'll always revert back. That's just the rule. No status quo is permanent beyond the normal status quo. Everyone got upset when, Superman and Wonder Woman were dating, and guys, it's not going to last. Just let them do what they want to do for a while. Even if you don't like it, it's not going to last. Don't worry about it. And so, I'm not mad at Tom King for doing this, and he told a damn good story in doing it, but at the same time, I have trouble being able to enjoy it on a personal level other than just an objective level because of what he's doing to the character here.
That's fair. Because we're all going to be bringing different backgrounds to this story anyway, so for some people who are big Green Lantern fans, it is going to play like that. For people who aren't, it might not. And I'm really curious to see how this book is going to be perceived, and if and how it's going to be remembered long term. Because, we can all probably think back to things like this where it was just a short run of a book, but it was really good, and it was one of those things why didn't this last 100 issues? So, I would suspect this might be one of the things from just this era of comics that might be still sort of obscure, but amongst certain people in certain circles will be remembered really fondly.
Yeah.
I am worried that it'll, there's no getting around Jeff Johns' imprint on Green Lantern, and anyone that 20 years from now wants to start reading Green Lantern or read the good Green Lantern stories, they're going to go to Jeff Johns. I am somewhat worried that this will become kind of the Dark Knight Returns or year one of Green Lantern books, and people will go, oh, you want to read Green Lantern? Here's this really, really good Green Lantern story. And while it's a really, really good story that has a Green Lantern character in it, I wouldn't call this a good Green Lantern story because it doesn't really give you... There's nothing else Green Lantern that's quite like this.
I wouldn't be worried about that, though, because part of the reason people do that with Year One and Dark Knight Returns is because DC acts like they're the only graphic novels ever written, and everything Batman started to turn into that. Green Lantern's not going to turn into this. It's with people like Jeff Johns who have their say in the book. There's no way the mainstream Green Lantern book's going to turn into every single issue is a parallel to some horrible warlike situation. It's not easy to write, and it's even more difficult to mimic.
Certainly, and I'm worried that like someone will get this and this will be their first Green Lantern story, because that's not what I want for anyone. Is for this to be the first thing they've ever read with Green Lantern, because it's not very reflective of the universe. So I have that trouble with it coming to it as a fan of the character and of the mythos, but on just like trying my best to be objective about it, there's no denying how brilliant it is.
I agree with you. I will say, because the most of the Green Lantern stuff I've read is the Jeff Johns stuff, and I went back recently and read all of the original Kyle Rayner stuff. So for me, this as a conclusion to Kyle's journey from beginning to end is really good. But it certainly shouldn't be where your intro to Kyle Rayner is.
Yeah. And I do like it more than the New Guardians book. I was really surprised to find out Duke hates New Guardians.
Yeah, I feel like I should have remembered that, but I didn't.
That came out of nowhere for me. I was like, how could anyone hate that book? It was so good. It was like, for a while, it was the best thing DC was putting out along with All-Star Western.
Who was writing that at the time?
No one read.
New Guardians or All-Star Western?
New Guardians. Because I read All-Star Western when it came out in the New 52. And you're right, it definitely was good.
Let me look that up. I can't remember who was writing Green Lantern New Guardians. Green. New Guardians was written, at least Volume 1, by, Tony Bedard.
Bedard, yeah.
Okay.
And I don't know if he, continued to do the, I guess he did all 40 issues.
He's the Legion guy, isn't he?
I have no idea.
I think so. Yeah, that would make sense if he was doing Legion and New Guardians. I mean, he wasn't writing them simultaneously, but I know him from Legion of Superheroes, I think.
Oh, no, wait. By the time it ended, Justin Jordan was writing it, so maybe there was a switch off there. Who knows? Yeah, I enjoyed it from the beginning, and I loved it by the end, so... if you like Kyle Rayner and you want to see him do a story that isn't fucking depressing as shit, better New Guardians. It's only 40 issues, and I don't think it's been collected properly, so...
Is it not?
Good luck.
Really?
There have been a couple trades, but I don't think it was there are a bunch of crossovers with other Green Lantern books at the time, so...
that's a shame.
It's a mess to collect, but whatever. I just liked it because it was a lot of one or two issue stories that didn't really have anything to do with anything else, so it was just refreshing. But regardless of all that, I do love things about Omega Men, but like I said from the very beginning, my fandom of Green Lantern really affects my ability to enjoy this book.
That's fair. One thing we didn't talk about was the covers, which I think are just make me drool. They're gorgeous.
I love them, yeah.
Really? I didn't get into them that much. I guess part of it's just, once again, nerd rage. Oh, God damn it, Kyle Rayner doesn't wear the Green Lantern outfit anymore.
I mean, part of what I liked about them is they've got, all of them have this very clear, Art Deco style, but then they're graffitied with the Omega Men on it. I think that's a really interesting and really telling symbol, because they're all really clean, they're all really, really aesthetically pleasing and very simple, but if you look at them deeply at all, there's some kind of underlying darkness to what they're presenting, and then they're graffitied with Omega Men, and I think that's the perfect symbol for the book.
Yeah. Well, the style of it reminds me so much of the title cards for Batman the Animated Series.
Oh, yeah?
That same kind of style, airbrushed.
Interesting. Yeah.
If you get the trade, every time an issue ends, you see the next cover just cleanly with no text, and then you flip it over, and then the titles come up.
Oh, cool.
It's kind of nice, yeah.
I'm interested. Did they do the because they have that 9-panel opening page on each issue with DC Comics Presents.
Yeah.
And then they did that in the trade too, because I imagine that might get a little distracting.
They just keep it with black text, I think. Or not text, but just black paneled boxes. Every issue still opens with an alternating panel black thing, but sometimes it says things and sometimes it doesn't.
Oh, so it's just an empty black panel.
Yeah. Part of that's odd, but it also works with the pacing and then all the William James quotes at the end.
I love the William James quotes. Those are fun.
Yeah. I've never been a big William James fan, but I do like the specific stuff he's pulling from here, from his letters and stuff.
It's one of those things it doesn't. I can never remember who I'm quoting when I say this, but I shall never hesitate to quote a bad author if the line is good. So I don't even care how you feel about William James. It's just those are freaking great little one-offs to throw in there.
Well, I mean, part of it is that you could have a story, and then you could throw a philosophical quote in and act like it's paralleling, but then if you look at the person that you're quoting, it might not necessarily. But apparently,
True.
Tom King was a philosophy major, and the William James stuff he's pulling from is from his more theological pragmatist work, and in most of those writings, he's saying a lot of the same stuff we're getting in these stories, which is cool.
Yeah, I noticed that the James quotes that he pulled were less of the formal philosophy style things and more of his personal stuff, because James was into all sorts of mystical religious sort of stuff, and so I think it works.
I agree.
It's not it fits with Kyle because he is religious and he's in this really interesting situation where he has to try and make sense of and do the right thing in when the right thing is not necessarily obvious or not necessarily the thing that's going to work in this situation.
Yeah.
Well, what I find really interesting is Kyle's whole mantra here kind of comes from the scripture where it's when given the choice between two evils, choose. And he's trying his best, but there's no interest in any kind of alternative. No one wants to not fight here, is the thing.
Yeah.
No one wants to give up where they are, and no one wants to lose ground. No one wants to not fight. So there's no interest in a third option.
And I think that's the appeal to the James stuff, because James was writing in that back and forth with pragmatism and basic continental philosophy, and Tom King isn't going out and quoting shit like The Will to Believe or Psychology or Human Immorality, any of that big argument text. He's going to very specifically the letters William James was writing to other people. He's quoting from his correspondence, and in those correspondence he says things like, these arguments aren't leading us anywhere, or there has to be a way out of this dichotomy, and William James's state of mind in the stuff he's quoting is exactly the same as Kyle's going through this.
That's really interesting, because I haven't read much of James on his own, but I think one or two papers here or there, but that's interesting to find out about where he was coming from with these quotes in particular. Did you have a favorite one that you think really hit with the issue, with the tone of the issue?
Not off the top of my head. I feel like they all kind of worked in their own context. I didn't think one was particularly more poignant than the rest.
Maybe it's just me really liking this line. I think it's really good, pointed philosophy kind of thing. More so than it rings with the issue itself, as I really like the world is all the richer for having a devil in it as long as we keep our foot on his throat.
Oh, yeah.
That's a really good line. You can tell he wrote that. He's ooh, yeah, there we go.
Yeah, that's a classic James line.
Tweeting this.
Yeah, right? If philosophers had Twitter, oh, that'd be the best thing ever. Heidegger would be all God damn it. Heidegger would have benefited from Twitter. It would have made him a better writer.
Wittgenstein would have been great on Twitter.
Well, as we get into just general silliness, was there anything else anyone wanted to make sure we talked about with this?
I just want to say I liked the characters, and it's sort of sad some of them don't make it to the end of the story, because I would have loved to have seen more with them.
It's one of those things where I really hope they don't continue on. Like, the fact that this didn't sell very well makes me kind of hopeful that the dead characters will stay dead, because just
How
generally
often does that happen?
yeah, because generally speaking, death never matters in comic books. So, since Death of Superman, of course. So I would very much appreciate if there was actual cost and dead characters stayed dead, which would be particularly poignant considering that the first time we ever see the White Lantern, or the White Entity or whatever, in Green Lantern comic books is when it, like, resurrects a bunch of long dead characters. So it would be really poignant to leave these characters in the dirt, as it were. With Kyle Rayner being the White Lantern.
Yeah, I think bringing them back would just undermine the impact of the story.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Steve, nothing else for you?
Not really. I kind of love it. I read it twice now. I might go back to it pretty soon just because it's a really interesting place to put your mind, and it gives you good perspective, I think.
Yeah, I'll just say that, like, this will probably be one of the things I point to when people say comic books are for kids.
Yeah.
No kid should read this book, I don't think. It's too heavy.
They won't get it, so.
Yeah, that too. I get bothered when I see kids reading Watchmen, and I'm like, no, you're not ready for that yet.
This is rated T for teen, so.
Well, okay. That doesn't...
I'm sorry. T+, teen plus.
Oh, T+. Shit just got real.
Not to get onto ratings, but that just kind of goes to where you can tell that the people who are rating comics probably have no idea what they're doing. Like, they're just going through looking for instances of blood and gore, and they clearly have no idea about what they're reading, like the contextual heaviness of the words on the page, as it were.
Mm-hmm.
I'd be interested to see what a rater would give Batman number 6, because I feel like that's definitely heavier than most blood and gore I've seen.
Probably. God, Tom King, like, makes me sad, but it's also all brilliant, so... it gives me all kinds of conflicting feels. Okay, let's go ahead and do a rating. I think I'm going to give 2 ratings personally, and then I'll let you two figure out what you want to do. I'm going to rate this as a fan of Kyle Rayner and Green Lantern, and as just like an outsider, is this a good or bad book? So as far as outside perspective, yeah, this is a 5 out of 5. I'll give it 5 out of 5 dung thrown at brute. And it is good they're throwing dung and not rocks. Rocks are holy. That was a fun line. And I will give this 3.5 out of 5 mystical substances that can for some reason or another save planets. And that's from the perspective of a Green Lantern fan, because I still think it's pretty good, but it's like really heavy on the character, and that makes it hard to read. Steve, how about you?
I'm gonna give this 5 out of 5 decapitated vice chancellors.
And Alex?
I'm gonna give this 4 out of 5 throat slashes, of which there were an absurd amount in this book. Every issue, there's at least 2 or 3 throat slashed.
Maybe it's like, Tarantino has this thing with the feet in all of his movies. Maybe that's Tom King's thing.
Throat slashing.
Watch Tom King leave a comment like, I'm not a throat slashing fetishist. There was a reason.
Tom King was Jack the Ripper.
It's just like there's like no dialogue or like monologue or anything. It's just all panels of Jack the Ripper throat slashing people.
Yep.
Yeah, there we go.
It'll sell well in trade.
Yeah. Everyone, thank you very much for watching. Next week, we'll be discussing long-form versus short-form storytelling in comics, because I feel that's an interesting place to talk about stuff. So please tune in for that. Until next time, everyone, I'm the Philosopher.
I am the Politician.
And I'm the Enthusiast.
And we're your Geeky Gentlemen, and we will be discussing things.